The City of Wilmington Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, January 11th, 2023 is called to order. Would you rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Mr. Attorney, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All matters requiring commission action shall be presented to the Planning Commission by the planning staff and the applicant. In situations where the planning staff is the applicant, there will be only one presentation. City staff will make the first presentation. The applicant will make the second presentation. Both presentations are limited to 5 minutes. To maintain an orderly meeting, all presentations shall proceed without interruption unless the commission desires to intervene with questions or comments. The chair will open the public hearing for those physically present wishing to speak about an item. Those in favor of an item shall be heard first, followed by those opposed to an item. A 10-minute time limit will be allowed for public comment in favor. A 10-minute time will be allowed for public comment in opposition. And who's our timekeeper this evening? Thank you, Ms. Painter. Staff member will track the 10-minute time periods and notify the speaker at the 5-minute mark, 1-minute mark, and verbally call time when it expires. The chair, in their discretion, may extend these time periods. All groups, organizations, neighborhood, or similar associations desiring to comment are asked to appoint one spokesperson to present their concerns or point of view to the commission on each agenda item. The public has been encouraged to submit their comments in writing via a web-based form located on the city's website. All comments received prior to 3 p.m. today were forwarded unedited to the Planning Commission. All comments received will also be delivered to the City Council when the item advances. All comments received will be made available to the public if requested. All votes will be voice votes after proper motions are made and consistency statements read into the record. The chair will state the outcome of the vote and the action. Rezoning requests that receive an unfavorable recommendation from the Planning Commission may be appealed by the applicant to the Wilmington City Council. Appeal should be in the form of a letter submitted to the city clerk within 10 days of this hearing. Any items being appealed will tentatively be heard at the second City Council meeting in February, currently set for February 21st, 2023. Okay, Commissioners, the minutes from the December 7th meeting were in your packet. Is there any comments, revisions? If not, we could entertain a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor of approving the meeting minutes from December 7th, 2022, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. The motion passes 7-0. All right, we have, I'm going to ask the commission if we could adjust the order of the agenda and do the elections last, instead of having the our public sit through that, waiting for their item. Can I have a motion to revise the agenda?
I so move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on that? Okay. All in favor of moving the agenda item to elect chair and vice chair to the end after agenda item number 4, say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Thank you. All right, so we'll move to item number 1, which is a street closure of 2 portions of Willard Street, a 66-foot wide improved right-of-way located between South 2nd Street and Burnett Boulevard, between Burnett Boulevard and Park Street, with a total length of approximately 297 feet in length, consisting of 0.4 of an acre. And Mr. Chambers has our staff report.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. The request is to close two segments of Willard Street. The western segment is located between South Second and Burnett, and the eastern segment is located between Burnett and Park Street. This map shows the site within the context of the surrounding area. We have several photos of the western portion of that right-of-way. And we have several photos of the eastern portion of that right-of-way. Willard Street consists of 4 blocks between Front Street and East Lakeshore Drive. The area is currently zoned light industrial, urban mixed use, and R5 residential. The section proposed for closure extends from South Second to Park Street, is bisected by Burnett. Park Street provides access to the northern portion of the Greenfield Lake Park. If approved, the street closure request would add additional street frontage and lot area to 5 adjacent parcels, and the right-of-way in those adjacent lots are currently zoned UMX, urban mixed use. The applicant has indicated they intend to construct a private parking lot within the public right-of-way located between 2nd Street and Burnett. There is no proposed use identified for the section between Burnett and Park. The applicant has also submitted a site distance and grid system evaluation in support of the closure between 2nd Street and Burnett Boulevard, and this evaluation does not address the proposed closure between Burnett and Park. The request would result in an elimination of approximately 20 existing on-street parking spaces on Willard Street that is currently available for public use. As part of the procedural requirements for all street closures, city departments are notified and asked to evaluate the impacts. Several city departments have indicated that the proposed closure would have an adverse impact on the road network and municipal services. There are a number of infrastructure improvements and utilities located within the right-of-way, including drainage, water, sewer, gas, electric, and potentially other non-municipal utilities. The requested closure will eliminate a portion of the historic street grid, thereby reducing interconnectivity and the available access points to and from this commercial area. Staff does not believe the site distance issue identified in this location warrants the closure of the right-of-way, and the available crash data does not indicate the need for the closure. Staff recommends that any potential site distance issues that are located at this intersection be addressed with an improvement to the intersection rather than closing the right-of-way. The principal issue when determining whether to close the public right-of-way is whether the closure would impair the surrounding street network. Consideration must also be given as to whether the closing of the street is contrary to the public interest or whether it adversely impacts neighboring properties. Staff's evaluation indicated that the requested closure would have reduced interconnectivity between 2 major roadways. It would reduce access to an active mixed-use area in Greenfield Lake Park. The result in the elimination of the existing public on-street parking, and there are also a number of existing public utilities located within the existing public right-of-way. The comprehensive plan recognizes that the number of routes available for travel has a direct impact on traffic congestion as disconnected street systems contribute to congestion. The city's street network should be well connected to properly disperse traffic. Staff believes that closing this public right-of-way would impair the surrounding street network and it would adversely impact neighboring properties. Any potential site distance issues at this intersection could be addressed with improvements to the intersection as opposed to closing it. Staff believes this proposed street closure is not consistent with our comprehensive plan. We believe the request is not reasonable in the public interest, and we are recommending denial. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is prepared to make a presentation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff? Commissioner Woodruff?
Brian, the small parcel on the east side, there's no indication of planned usage of that. Why would the city even contemplate dealing with that piece of property? I know the staff's denial is across the board, the whole thing, but forgetting the bigger piece, the smaller piece, is that not paved? Willard Street?
It's improved all the way through.
Right. So, I'm looking at the map, to cut that off stops somebody from going north on Burnett, from taking a right turn onto Willard and going towards the park or getting into the park. I'm just curious if you have reason to think otherwise, why would the city take that out of its usage?
I cannot think of a good reason.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Pollak?
Brian, can you go back to your, well, actually, you've got the right picture up, thank you. When I look at the big section, and I'm trying to get my head around when I drove out there the other day and I saw the, the black and yellow sign, this picture tells me that it would close the street and probably go on to that property there up to the house, but not including, or I say the building, whatever that is. So do I interpret that correctly, that the building, and on down is not part of it? It's just the street and a little bit off the street?
It's just the right-of-way, which includes the street itself, the improved portion of the street, sidewalk, and the plaza area. The building on the north is basically on that property line, and I don't know exactly how far out that house is, but it's pretty close to the property line as well.
That's what, okay, that's what this suggests to me. The other question I have is, it's more of a, as I have read through this, I look at the picture, are we just swapping parking places for parking places?
There are existing parking on the street, and the applicant has indicated they propose to construct a private parking lot.
And there would be no proposed entrance or exit onto,
Commissioner Pollak, can you speak into your mic?
Amy, I always have that problem, I know. There's no indication that the applicant wants to still have egress onto Burnett Road at all. I mean, they propose to shut that
Right,
off.
I can only go by what they've submitted as part of the proposed parking lot, and this is what they've submitted to staff. They might be better equipped to answer that question when they come up.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Commissioner Adams?
Brian, can you think of any, I guess, precedents recently or historically where functional right-of-way has been, I'll say, abandoned and recombined with private property, as opposed to, if you could go back to your slide with the pie chart where you talk about the tenets of street closure criteria? I mean, we're talking about something different than an administrative type of street closure or a right-of-way that was never improved. I mean, is there anything like this that's been done recently that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of anything like this, no. They've all been either unimproved or in such disrepair that they haven't been used. They're at the end of a street. I think the last one this commission saw was Surrey Street down at the bridge, and it basically was off of an unimproved road that went up to the right-of-way for the Memorial Bridge. So it was never improved. It was never used. So this is definitely a unique situation.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lennon?
Attorney Evans, can you remind me, because I know this is always a bug in the bonnet for me, or a bee in the bonnet, whatever, but the city can't be compensated for this. Is that right?
That's correct. The city, by statute, cannot sell right-of-way. The power that the city has over their right-of-way is to maintain it as a street, or if council voted to close it, then they could close it. If they closed it, what typically happens by statute is it would be split down the middle, and the right-of-way would go to the property owner, half on one side and half on the other, unless there was some unusual shape to it.
Okay, so on that note, could you put the slide back up with the picture? So in this one, they're actually requesting the entire right-of-way, not 50% of it, right? Because whoever owns that house right there, under what you just said, would arguably get half of it?
By statute, unless there's some other plat that's recorded and the council agrees to, it would be split down the middle, and part would go one side, part would go the other side.
So barring some other council action, the statute says just split it down the middle?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there were 20 parallel spaces?
Approximately. We didn't run a tape out there, but just using aerials and seeing the number of vehicles and kind of extrapolating from that, it's roughly 20.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if there, Commissioner Kofer?
Mr. Chambers, the property to the north is zoned urban mixed use, and in the LDC table for front setbacks, it says, you know more about this than me, I think it says a maximum of 10 feet on the front setback. Does that mean that, if I'm correct in saying that, am I correct there?
You are correct.
Perfect. Does that mean, am I to imply that that could also be a 0 setback? If it's a maximum of 10, there's no minimum?
I mean, yes, 0 is what's recommended to have an active streetscape and have a pedestrian-oriented street frontage. The maximum is 10 because we don't want the building set so far back where you don't have that interaction.
And without looking at a survey or anything, would we just assume this is probably a 0 setback on Burnett?
Yes.
Assuming so, okay. And the only reason I asked that was in the event that this were to go through and they tear the building down, what would all that look like, you know, in regards to setback? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you.
Oh, one more, sorry. Commissioner Lennon.
And this might be, excuse me, a better question for the applicant, but in the diagram of the parking lot, the house on the corner, how do they get out?
It's my understanding that house would no longer be there. You're talking to the house on the south side of the right-of-way at the corner?
Yes.
I believe they would, based on what I'm seeing, it would look like they would remove the house and it would just be for the parking lot.
Okay. I'll wait to hear from the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you.
All right, we'll invite the applicant up. Mr. Frank?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. My name's Sam Frank. I represent the applicant. With me this evening are Michael Maynard, who's one of the owners of the applicant entity, and also Don Bennett, a traffic engineer. Before I delve into my presentation, let me address a couple of the facts that you just discussed. First, there's common ownership of the parcels located to the north and to the south on the west side of this proposal. That's not true on the east side of the proposal. Different owners, the small triangle to the north and to the south, but on the west side where the proposed parking facility is located, contemplated parking facility is located, you have common ownership, and so the one owner would get the entirety of the right-of-way. Second, to say that there's 20 parking spaces available is, in my opinion, aggressive. There are no lined or identified parking spaces along Willard Street today. What we have is the practical reality that people desperately looking for parking when they visit the South Front District end up parking along the side of the road. And you would have to park on both sides of the road to get to 20 spaces. To do so would leave a clearance of just under 22 feet, which is not a lot of room for two-way traffic. As it turns out, nobody really uses the road, so that's not a big deal. But I wanted to offer that clarification. The concept that we've put together for a parking lot includes 51 parking spaces, so it's a significant increase in the number of parking spaces that would be available. So this is a proposal to close an underutilized section of public street in the interest of establishing more parking in a location where it is desperately needed. The applicant's efforts to revitalize the South Front District have been substantial, and they've been successful. This area of the city that only 15 years ago included a failing public housing endeavor and very limited commercial activity is now booming and a culturally significant district in the city, hosting dozens of businesses and significant housing options for our citizens. The natural consequence of that successful revitalization is that there is a meaningful shortage of parking for patrons, businesses, and residents in the South Front District. This is an ambitious ask. I get it. We are asking you to close a section of the grid, and as staff has explained, there isn't any significant precedent for that. It's also a justified ask. While that very limited sacrifice in this case does not align well with a paper analysis, I encourage you to look beyond the scope of that paper analysis and consider the overall public benefit of increasing parking in this location. First, this alternative is in the city's interest. In short, we need the parking more than we need that section of road. The overwhelming support from the business operators and neighbors in this area, which we shared with you earlier this afternoon, echoes that sentiment. Second, this section of street is desperately underutilized. Mr. Bennett will speak in more details about that in a moment, but you're talking about a fraction of a percent of the vehicles on Burnett that utilize Willard Street. And anecdotally, from the applicant who's been living and breathing in the South Front District for all these years, it appears like often the people who are driving on Willard Street are there because they're looking for somewhere to park. Third, part of the reason that this street segment is so underutilized is that it's challenging to turn off of Willard and onto Burnett due to the short sight distances in either direction. Fourth, there are other safer and more appropriate paths to utilize to access businesses and homes located in the South Front District, namely the inclusion of the street to the north, which has a traffic light, and of course, utilization of Front Street.
1 minute.
Is our staff
sorry.
timer?
Thank you. Finally, the other public uses of this land for pedestrian interconnectivity and public utilities can be retained. The applicant is 100% on board with the notion that easements would be established both for pedestrian access and for continued use of the land for the water and sewer that's in that location. With your permission, Madam Chair, I'd like to invite our traffic engineer to talk to you about 2 points in specific, both the site distances that I referred to and also the underutilization of this road. To do so, I have to ask for a little bit of additional time.
2-3 minutes, something like that?
That will suffice.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Let me introduce Mr. Don Bennett with Davenport Engineering, familiar to many of you. He's a traffic engineer and an expert in this field.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. As noted, when the applicant came to us on the request, I looked back and he asked about the potential for closing this, and I said, well, I had some prior experience looking at this intersection. Of course, as you may know, I retired recently as the city traffic engineer for Wilmington, and during that tenure had an opportunity to look at this as a response to a citizen complaint. One thing we noted was the lack of sight distance for egress from the western approach of Willard Street to Burnett Boulevard. We ran the numbers based upon the DOT standards because this is a DOT road. Willard Street is a city street, and found that for all movements exiting Willard Street from the west, that insufficient sight distance or substandard sight distance exists for vehicles. When we look at trying to resolve that issue, the only practical way to do that is to eliminate that movement so that it eliminates the potential for collision from someone pulling out from Willard Street without being able to see, to either turn left from, cross, or even make a right from Willard Street. So just note that all movements do not have the requisite sight distance. So closing it shuts off those movements and it eliminates the potential for collisions. While the collision history was low, one should note that we have a very low volume out here. And that is probably what is leading to the low collision numbers. And while the volumes on Willard Street, because it is fairly well built out currently, would not increase over time, we would anticipate with suburban growth and infill on US 421 that the volumes on US 421 will in fact grow over time, which means that potential or the increase in the amount of traffic and the decrease in the number of available gaps will lead to a potential for increased collisions at this location. As noted, traffic volumes were counted out there. Physically, data was collected recently in this year using standard NCDOT factors that those movements for 13 hours were extrapolated to a 24-hour volume, and in an average estimated day time of 24 hours, 210 vehicles used Willard Street to the west and approximately 381 to the east. It should be noted that the American Association for State Highway Transportation organization notes that anything under 400 vehicles is noted a low volume road with regard to the standards that are applicable to it. So to say that Burnett is low volume is accurate. We should also note that for its entirety, Burnett is one of the shortest streets in the grid system. It only exists from Front Street to 5th, and then in its public nature for one block from 15th to 16th. There are a number of other streets which have discontinuous sections through them, and the ability of this to carry anything more than just the local traffic that currently uses it and the potential for growth on it is limited. So I would be here to answer any questions you may have about the report or the methods to determine it.
Your excellent timing. Sounds like the timer just went off. Did you practice that? Great, thank you. Yes. Yes, it's time for questions.
I'll try to be really quick.
Commissioner Woodrum.
Well, I was going to ask you, I'm going to get to you later, Sam. I'm just curious, obviously, the city staff took a little issue with your projections and the safety issue and so forth and so on. But the proposal before us is there's no ingress, egress onto Burnett. But do you have an opinion as to whether or not, I mean, if the parking lot were to provide an ingress, egress on on Burnett Street?
The current design that I have seen and is represented to me does not show access to there. We have two things that come into play here. The first is how far practically could you remove the driveway if you were to give access to Burnett Boulevard from that corner, and could you establish adequate sight distance from the parking lot to Burnett? Without a specific design that pegs down where we'll be able to put that driveway based upon setbacks, offsets, street yards, all of those things, we wouldn't be able to comment on whether we're actually meeting that. The second thing is that the North Carolina Department of Transportation does have a major project to reconstruct the intersection at Carolina Beach Road front and Burnett.
Right.
As part of that, they will be adding a roadway that currently runs through about where the park's maintenance facility is. At least that's their current projected plan. And putting a driveway there may actually get into what we call the functional area of the intersection for that proposed signalized intersection in the future.
All right. And I realize this would be up to the developer, but I mean, looking at the schematic we have here, if you move that, I mean, where Willard Street is, but move the ingress, egress further south, I mean, as far south as you could, it would help alleviate this issue of safety from people coming around the curve, correct?
That is correct. And again, we ran the sight distance values at 40 miles an hour. While it's posted at 35, we're always told to go up to the next 5 miles an hour in the DOT driveway manual for evaluating our sight distances.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question for the applicant? Commissioner Cofer?
Thank you, Mr. Frank. What, in the event that this were to be abandoned and privatized, what assurances would the citizens of Wilmington have that a parking lot's actually going to take place, because the titled interest would, become private?
Yeah, so the intention is to build what you see on the screen. And I understand your point that how do you have any assurance that that lasts forevermore? We can accept and create conditions in connection with the street closure, as I understand it, and fully anticipate that conversation with the city council will include exactly that topic.
Commissioner Pollack?
While you have this one diagram up, currently, the house that's on that plot of land, where is the house, inside the box or outside the box? The house is the house going to go away? Is that
the house is going to go away? That understanding was correct. I'm sorry, I forgot who stated it, but the intention is that house would be removed in connection with development of the concept plan you see right there.
Okay.
I'll go next. Our staff report indicates, of course, that a commercial parking lot is not permitted in UMX. But if you were to build one without using Willard Street, did you consider using that, the lot that the house is on, and kind of do a count for how many spaces could fit on just that lot in addition to the spaces that are already on Willard, and compare that?
So we have a problem with scale. Once you incorporate, well, we also have a problem with zoning, as you noted. If this were to move forward as we've proposed, the land would be combined with the parcel to the north, and therefore the parking would be permitted in connection with the use on that parcel. But to answer your direct question, why not just develop an independent parking lot on the house that currently the lot that currently has the house on it? We have a problem with zoning, but we also have a problem with scale. Once you incorporate the setbacks and the entryway and the like, we don't have enough space for adequate parking to justify the project.
Okay. Commissioner Woodruff?
Real quick, the small parcel on the east side,
Yes, sir.
why is your client?
Why propose that at all?
Yeah.
Sure. So the fundamental drivers here for us, what started us down this path, are twofold. One, we need more parking. Two, the sight lines to that intersection to us are unsafe, and to our expert are unsafe. That's true on the east as it is on the west. The value of future use of the land is obviously much greater to us for the piece that's on the west. That's why we've shown you a concept plan for the future use of it. If you were to incorporate a right in, right out on the piece that's on the east side of Burnett, then potentially you help reduce the impact of the short sight distance, but you don't really get rid of it. And so because we're asking you to evaluate an intersection that we think is inherently unsafe, we thought the appropriate thing to do was propose closure on both sides. That said, if you are inclined to recommend closure of the portion on the west and not recommend closure of the portion on the east, we're certainly prepared to take that recommendation forward with the city council.
Is your client a landowner on the east side?
The south side of the east side, yes. The small triangle that's
Right.
on the north side of the east side is owned by another entity.
Okay, so your client is not a property owner adjacent to the small parcel?
Would you be kind enough to bring up a picture that
The
shows
south
that?
side of the small
So I can answer
parcel.
we
South
are the
side of
owner
the
on the south side of the eastern section
Oh, okay.
of Willard, but not the owner of the small triangle
The small,
on the
that
north
goes-
side.
Okay, I got it.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I was hoping to have the picture to help clarify, but it sounds like you understand the lay of the land by okay, very good.
So those are two lots there, and the applicant owns both of them? On the south side of the east side of the subject site? It looks like on our,
I know we own the one with the building on it. The small triangle also? Yeah. Yes.
okay. Yeah, so and the triangle, there's,
The south side triangle, not the north side.
right, the south side. And then an empty lot, it looks like, from the aerial, and then a lot with the house on it.
That's
So
right.
all three of those? Okay.
Yep.
All right, Commissioner Lennon?
I'm going to endeavor not to say south side. So this would be a private parking lot, correct?
It would be privately owned.
Who would park there?
The catalyst for this is a need for more parking for citizens and visitors to those businesses. And so, to some extent, some pressure from needing space for employees to park, but the primary interest is citizens and visitors to the South Front District having somewhere to park.
So how long have those apartments and the corresponding businesses on Second Street been there?
Can I invite my client to answer more accurately than I could?
Sure, yeah, I'm just,
Thank you. Michael, come on up. Okay. He said 5 to 7 years for the sake of the record. Obviously, not all developed at the same time, but the apartments have been there for 5 to 7 years, and the businesses have built out over the last 12 years.
so one of the comments you made in reference to parallel parking on Willard respectfully doesn't really work for me, and I'll tell you why in a second, but it led me to maybe are there other options? If anybody's been in any of the restaurants along Second Street, which I have on a weekend night, they're parked on both sides of the street, and people do find a way. Because the property to the, I almost said south, because the property where the house is now located is owned by the applicant, I mean, is there a consideration of maybe, I'm just throwing out an idea, maybe you've already looked at this, but a one-way to the east with diagonal parking on both sides of the street?
You talking about a reconfiguration of the existing public right-of-way?
Well, at least the parking on the north side, and then because your client owns the property to the south side, can encroach onto that to widen the right-of-way for additional parking.
That is an interesting proposal that we've not yet considered. I don't know what would be involved in changing a two-way street to a one-way street.
I have no idea either. I'm sure maybe Mr. Bennett could, but I'll save my commentary with the exception of, I think you're right. I think this is a big ask just because it is eliminating part of the grid. And the word connectivity is used almost as much as the word south up here, so.
I appreciate the creativity of your suggestion. Thank you for that.
That's all.
All right, anybody else for the applicant at this time? Thank you, Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
It's time to open the public hearing, and we'll start with comments in favor of this proposal, and and you'll have 10 minutes. So anyone who is here to speak in favor of this item is invited to the podium. Okay, we will move to anyone here who's come to speak in opposition of this item. All right, anyone to speak on this item? Agenda item number 1. All right, the public hearing is now closed. Commissioners, would you like to invite staff up or applicant up or discuss amongst ourselves what's the?
Madam Chair, if I may, I do think it's worthy to note, even though nobody spoke, that we did get some online comments.
It's true.
And I don't remember the exact count, or 2, but one included letters from.
There were 2 comments in opposition that were provided to you, and then the letter provided by Mr. Frank with letters of support for the project.
Neighboring businesses.
Yes, I believe that's the case.
Right, from the businesses who would.
There was also a comment for one of the other items, I believe College Acres, but if you read that comment, it also appears that it might actually be for this project also, even though they identified it as for the College Acres, the next one, the other project. Princess Street.
I apologize, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that made it.
No, I appreciate that. Yep, that's right. We did receive letters of support for, mostly from the area businesses who, of course, would welcome parking to help people reach there. Commissioner Woodruff?
I got a question for Sam. In your letter, Mr. Knowles, he had objected to this going, and you had indicated you understood he had changed his mind and was in favor of it, but there was no inclusive letter from him stating that. Can you just give me a little bit of that? Because he is, I think, a property owner of the Artswork, which is the next building down. So he's a principal person involved in what's going on here.
That's right. The building, and you can see the building or part of the building on this image that's on the screen now, thank you, is owned by a company called the Nautilus Group, I believe, and we understand the owners of that entity and the operators of the business to be, it goes by Jim Knowles and Betsy Knowles. Jim's legal name is Larry. And through discussion over the last several weeks, our client has achieved a common understanding with the Knowles and that would remove their opposition and state support. I wish very much that one of them could have been here tonight. Mr. Knowles is out of town. Ms. Knowles is feeling under the weather, and she wasn't in a position, therefore, to appear. That's something that we will need to address between now and City Council or at the City Council meeting, I recognize. And I apologize for the hearsay in my letter. The best I can do is explain that my client has had meaningful discussions with the Knowles to lead to that conclusion as I stated it.
If you can reveal, I mean, were concessions made on developers' part with the Knowles as to what they wanted or changes made or anything like that?
We talked about some concepts that didn't reduce themselves to any certain concessions. And I can talk about those if you want, although I don't know that they're relevant to your analysis
That's
tonight.
okay. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Anyone else while the applicant is at the podium have a, oh, he's. Okay. Mr. Chambers, I would like for you to give us a little more detail about the part of the staff report that mentions the, it was under the planning comments in the technical review. The commercial parking lots are not permitted in UMX. And just tell us a little bit more about that and the character that we're trying to create with these districts and why that would be so, and just
Right,
expand
so
on that comment.
The goal of the UMX is urban infill to create a vibrant streetscape. Buildings pull up to the street, public spaces. Cars parked along the street generally don't create that kind of atmosphere that the district is intended to create itself. Parking's not allowed on, in front of the building. Parking's not allowed on the corner of a lot in the UMX. The idea is to hide the parking and make it more about the use and the activity of the public in those areas.
Great. And the exhibit we have with the map shows that both parcels are UMX. Zoning, the zoning is the zoning is the black lines, the use are the colors, so it's a little confusing maybe for those watching at home.
Yes,
but-
the dark line would represent the zoning boundary. The colors represent the use of the properties. And then there's a key on the right that tells you what those uses are.
Okay, thank you for confirming that.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioners, discussion on this item? Commissioner Woodruff?
I don't have any questions. I just, a couple of comments. I know well what it is to look for parking places down there. I refuse to drive there without a full tank of gas sometimes. And so I'm all in favor of more parking because it's a wonderful development down there. I think we are going to have to put some faith into the developer because I don't think we have a leg to make you do anything. If we close the road, that's what it's going to be, whatever you do with it. I think your design, maybe with a tweak here or there, is great. I understand the dilemma of some people not having a through way, and I don't know how to offer them anything other than the thought I had of you move an ingress egress point further to the south on that, but if it can't be, it can't be. That being said, I think this part of it's good. For the life of me, I don't understand the other side of the Burnett Street, and so unless there's some other compelling reason, I don't see a reason to close that portion of Willard Street because it does provide some connectivity to get into the park, and there's no indication you need it for anything right now, so my thought is not to include that in the package. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Lennon?
The irony for me is, those of you who've heard me say this before, I'm a very big believer in property rights. Well, the irony here is this is the property of the city of Wilmington. And to me, where I'm struggling, I don't disagree with anything Commissioner Woodruff said. If they were paying us fair market value for the property, and that, this is in a dream world, those funds could be allocated to further enhance the public's ability to benefit from this project and everything around it. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about giving a publicly owned asset to someone for nothing. And I can't get comfortable with that. Although I do agree, if somebody else decides that we're going to, I, for the life of me, can't figure out why the east side would be. I did drive it. I think you'd have a really hard time if the east is as challenging as it may be to turn left from Willard to go north on Burnett. It'd be even more challenging to get onto Park Street from Burnett if you close that east section.
When to Mr. Frank's point about the paper, I think paper analysis is what you called it. We can see and have experience with driving down there and, oh, this fabulous development certainly would benefit from additional parking. But what our guiding documents are that paper analysis, and I think they are leading us to not approve the request or recommend approval of the request. Commissioner Pollack?
Yeah, my question is, I don't know if it's Brian or to Sean, but as I read through the package, if the planning commission were to say, you know, approve the request, and then it would go to city council, that looked to me like that's a really protracted process from city council to close the road. I mean, it's like seems like it's a month or two long, you know, set of advertised hearings, et cetera, et cetera. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, sir, that's exactly right. It's governed under 160A 299, and it's a two-step process for council, and there's an initial meeting, and then there's a second meeting where there would be a public hearing and a potential vote by council.
So an approval, as an example, we could be into March, April, you know, potential. I hate to be negative, but I mean, it would take it out well into the first quarter easily.
I haven't done the math on it yet, but I think it'd be at least the second meeting in March.
March 21st, for example. You know, it's in our packet.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, so, okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
The other issue is that this might it hasn't been done before, and it sets a precedent that I don't know that we want to deal with. Commissioner Lennon?
You stole my
Oh.
thunder, but that's exactly. I mean, I think, as Mr. Chambers pointed out earlier, at least since I've been here, everything I've seen have been, I'll just call them unused indoor abandoned right-of-ways. Just to reemphasize what I said before, this isn't like a proposed public-private partnership where the city gets a benefit and the applicant gets a benefit. We're just giving publicly owned property, and I don't believe I can support it. Unless it was done under some mechanism that brought benefit not only to the applicant, but also to the surrounding public and the citizens of Wilmington.
Just to follow up that, Sean, can the city sell this property?
No, sir, we don't have a mechanism that allows the city to sell right away.
But we can do a public-private partnership.
Certainly, Mr. Lennon, I am not certain that, let me let you ask your question further before I take a stab in the dark. How's that sound?
The city can enter into some form of development agreement or business arrangement with an applicant in regards to a piece of property or publicly owned property where the city benefits and the applicant benefits. Historically, I think that's been done before.
Yes, sir, you're absolutely right. Where I've seen that come into play before is like tax parcels that the city owns. Obviously, the city's not a taxable entity, but like, for example, the city owns the property that we're in here. So theoretically, the city could enter into a public-private partnership with a third party involving this property. I don't know how that interplay would be with a right-of-way situation. I don't see it addressed in the statute that I have in front of me.
Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, I think we're talking about a lot about precedent, particularly with the right-of-way, but I think another thing that I really struggle with precedent-wise is something that Brian hit on about the spirit of parking in UMX. Essentially, to me, what this is trying to suburbanize an urban part of town. And, I spend almost a weekly amount of time, in particular at two of those businesses, and I can always find a place to park. Sometimes it's on the street, sometimes it's behind the container district, sometimes it's in the lot to the north of Greenfield Street. So I think, again, precedents about trying to suburbanize a downtown area is something I have a major issue with. I also understand that there's some technical issues about safety, but I mean, we have who knows how many non-conforming, conditions like this in the urban grid, and I don't think we can always justify those kind of things for redesigning, in an area where just existing conditions can't maybe satisfy some of the current technical standards. So, again, major concerns for me.
Okay. The last thing I'll say before I call the question, because it sounds like the discussion is dying down, is a path of lesser resistance might be a design adjustment request for the site with the house on it. It sounds like there are some setback issues on that. If we could, if the parking could be hidden somehow, like it is with the building to the north of that, that might be like keeping the parking spaces on Willard and adding to that in that lot. And I didn't approve anything like that, but that's a recommendation that will go to a different body for review that might help if the parking can be masked. So, what is the will of the commission? We don't have a consistency statement on this, so you just would move to recommend approval or recommend denial on this item.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we recommend denial of the applicant's request for the closure of Willard Street from Second to Park.
Thank you. Commissioner Lennon has moved to recommend denial. Do we have a second? Second is Commissioner Adams. And we will do a voice vote. All those in favor of recommending denial of this item, say aye.
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 Any opposed to recommending denial, say nay. Okay, did everyone vote on that? Or were there any? Okay. So the vote, the motion is approved 7-0. All right. Agenda item number 2 is a conditional district rezoning modification of properties containing 2.13 acres located at 4742, 4746, 4750, and 4754 College Acres Drive to modify an existing MD17 CD high-density multiple dwelling residential district, conditional district, for 7 duplex buildings for a total of 14 four-bedroom units. And Mr. Mahoney is here to provide our staff report.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. This site is located on the southern side of College Acres Drive and contains approximately 2.13 acres. It's currently vacant. It once contained 4 single-dwelling homes. They have now been torn down. They're currently vacant property. You'll see the vicinity surrounding the request here. This is just to the north of the UNCW property. Here are the existing conditions. This is looking north on College Acres, west, east, and then the adjacent single-dwelling homes near the intersection of College Acres Drive and Racine. And these are photos of the subject properties I mentioned before with the homes removed. As mentioned, the site is currently zoned MD17, high-density multi-dwelling residential conditional zoning district. It's bordered by O&I zoning to the south, which is the UNCW campus. There's R15 zone lots directly to the east. To the west is the Cottages at College Acres project. That is the O&I CD zoning. And to the north is the MD17 CD zone property, which is the College Acres Apartments. Those are two previously approved conditional district rezonings. So before you, this is the previously approved site plan, which was approved by City Council on August 3rd, 2021. This was approved for 36 units within 3 multifamily structures. And this is the revised and proposed site plan for you tonight. If this were to be approved, it would replace the previous approval with what's before you, the 7 duplexes for a total of 14 units. There are a total of 56 bedrooms, as mentioned. These are elevations on the bottom that are provided by the applicant. I've also provided images of the Cottages at College Acres and the College Acres Apartments, which has a row along College Acres Drive of duplexes that mimic the streetscape of that area. The site is located within an employment, academic, mixed-use center in the Comprehensive Plan's Growth Strategies map. This promotes the introduction of housing uses where appropriate. Areas well-suited for infill development should be redeveloped in a way that maintains or enhances the desired character, increases housing options, and improves the overall quality of life. The proposed rezoning would allow for context-sensitive infill development that's compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. This proposed modification continues the established block face along College Acres Drive, which now primarily consists of those duplex structures that I showed previously. Staff does believe that this proposed amendment and modification is consistent with the recommendations of the Crate Wilmington Comprehensive Plan and that the request is reasonable public interest. Staff recommends conditional approval with the conditions in the case summary be applied. That concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions, and the applicant's here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. It's refreshing to have a down zoning. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff at this time? Commissioner, is that Commissioner Pollock?
Question. Sorry, Amy. Question, what exactly, it says, you know, it's the application to rezone. Are we actually rezoning, or are we just changing the you know, the approved plan back in 2021 and substituting? Is that really what the change is?
It would be a modification to an existing conditional district rezoning, which would then update the ordinance. So I think technically, Sean, you probably correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be sort of like its own modification to a rezoning.
Technically, yeah, I think it's a rezoning, but I mean, on paper, it's a modification of something that already exists, same zoning district, just to, you know.
If approved, it's still going to end up MD17, which it is today.
But the conditions would be different.
The conditions would change.
Yes, sir.
So that's what we're modifying, got it, okay. Or being asked to modify.
Anyone else? Commissioner Lennon?
I think this is deja vu, because I remember the first one, where they are now. And this may be a question better for the applicant, but on the lower part of what's previously approved, what are all those dark hash marks? They're dark, well, sorry, they're dark on paper, they're not dark on the,
Those were parking spaces.
those are parking spaces.
Pervious, it looks like it's pervious
They're
parking.
Pervious
spaces.
parking, yeah, along the south, yeah.
Okay, all right, I'll save another question for the applicant then.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you,
All right,
Mr.
thank
Mahoney.
you.
We'll invite the applicant to come up now. Welcome, Ms. Wolf.
Good evening. I'm Cindy Wolf, and I've been working through this project. I'll just pretty much reinforce a few things that Pat brought up. This is the last piece of a comprehensive project for an apartment project. It is called the Cottages at College Acres. The first phase is there attached to the red box, and that is technically a commercial district mixed use, but primarily it is college housing. The second phase is what is on the opposite side of College Acres Drive, and it was a combination of keeping the street front that had gotten started with the duplexes on the southwest side, and then some three-story buildings that were a reasonable transition to the apartment complex that is just to the north of there. When we came forward with, and of course, as we pointed out, it is MD-17, it would stay MD-17, but because it's a conditional district, it's technically referred to as a rezoning. This was the original plan. We certainly had to fight hard for it. I can only imagine that at the time, financial considerations, for whatever reason, they felt density-wise, the need for housing in this area with the college being right next door, we fought hard and we were able to have an approval of these three-story apartment units. Since that time, however, the owner of the entire complex has rethought, relooked at everything that has been going on, probably how the units are rented, the popularity of the different types of units, and also one of the points that was spoken about throughout the entire, all three of these, was about parking. The very first section, which is commercial district mixed use, was severely underparked. It appeared, it was evidenced after the fact. The opposite side is parked reasonably, but overall there was an underparked situation. So in his wisdom, he thought he was not in need of as many units and was in need of more parking. This satisfied both of those items. So basically, what we're here tonight is to amend it. In a lot of, in essence, it is somewhat of a downzoning, if you will, as far as the number of units. It would be the architectural design that is already along that block face, very similar. And so we do believe that this modification of the original zone is consistent, reasonable in the public interest, and just the items that have changed, all for the better, we believe, is that the density has been reduced from 36 to 14. More housing would probably be logical, but it is a trade-off of the best use of the land and not having issues such as underparking. The building height was reduced from 3 to 2-story. Certainly, there is some increased tree protection based upon this site compared to the other, primarily because we have more open space and we can work the amenity area into around the trees better than any type of building or parking could have been. Reduction in overall building coverage, reduction in impervious surfaces, increase in that overall open space and the addition of the amenity, and reduction in overall parking spaces of what it would have been had there been 36 more units rather than the 14. So we believe this is a win-win. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, do you have any? Commissioner Adams?
Since you brought up parking, the quad units would be basically 14 units times 4 bedrooms, that's 56 basically beds.
That's correct.
And what is your parking count in your new proposed layout?
Oh, I wish you hadn't asked. We went through that quite a bit. We have gone through a parking analysis. A traffic engineer did it. This site, I believe, has
70 spaces.
70 spaces. So 46 of those, obviously. So what we've created basically is almost a 1 space to 1 bed for the, let's see, back, for the entire development.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, the maximum of a maximum of 41 spaces allowed and 70 spaces are provided. And as you said, there's a parking analysis to back that up. Typically, we'd ask for some of those additional overmax to be pervious pavement. Is that
And
something
that may very well happen in TRC. The actual stormwater management method has not been totally fleshed out yet. We have had soils tests, and so we do believe that the infiltration in the parking lot is feasible. If you have infiltration, you can't put porous spaces on top of them, but it can be a combination of those things depending on how the engineer works with it. but that will all be fleshed out at TRC. Yes, generally, spaces in addition to used to be. It's not a code now that there's baselines. There's been a lot of changes in the way that's interpreted. But yes, I fully expect that some of these spaces will end up being porous pavement. I just didn't show them specifically at this point in time.
It's hard to commit to them without the stormwater plan being, gotcha. Commissioner Lennon?
Just to follow up on that, this is a question I was going to ask. Your slide answered it, but just to reemphasize, you are reducing the impervious surface
Yes,
from the current.
even though we have the parking that will help Phase 1, overall, the impervious surface has been reduced approximately 9–10%.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Pollack?
Yeah, Ms. Wolf, one question. As I drove by the site the other day and I see where you've already leveled a lot of the ground and taken out whatever was there. If this was not approved, what would you do?
He could build the 3 stories.
You could revert back to the, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have that plan in place right now, so he's certainly entitled to build that plan. I suppose he could build the plan with the parking and just assume that perhaps some of those units might not be occupied. It'd be hard to define exactly what would happen, but we certainly believe this is a better plan now.
Fair point, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wolf.
Thank you.
It's time to open the public hearing. And we'll start with those who are here to speak in favor of agenda item number 2. Come on up to the podium and start with your name and address. Anyone here to speak in favor of agenda item 2? All right, is anybody here to speak in opposition to agenda item number 2? Anyone here to speak on agenda item number 2? All right, public hearing is closed. Commissioners, any discussion on this? Commissioner Lennon?
I just think this is indicative of the fact that the market's going to find a way to make sure the right product ends up in the right place. And I'll be happy to make a motion at such time as necessary.
Is that your hand up, Commissioner Woodruff? You're okay. Okay, what's the will of the commission on this one?
I guess I asked for that. Madam Chair, I'll move to approve agenda item, recommend approval for agenda item number 2, the request to modify an existing MD-17 CD for 4742, 4746, 4750, and 4754 College Acres Drive. This request is consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington, the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest, as the proposal would allow for redevelopment that maintains or enhances the desired character of the area, while providing additional housing options near the university and close to commercial services. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request.
Thank you, Commissioner Lennon. Commissioner Lennon has moved to recommend approval for agenda item number 2. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Adams, second? All right, and all in favor of the motion to approve agenda item number 2, say aye.
Aye.
Against, say nay. Okay, and did anybody not vote? The motion passes 7-0. Oh, I got 3 minutes. All right, agenda item number 3 is a conditional district rezoning of property containing .0 acres and portions of adjacent rights-of-way of Princess Street North 12th Street and rear unnamed alley located at 1201 and 1203 Princess Street, from O&I CD, Office and Institutional Conditional District, to UMX CD, Urban Mixed Use Conditional District, for an existing sit-down restaurant use and 2 residential units. And Mr. Mahoney is back with us to give the staff report.
Good evening again, Madam Chair, members of the commission. As mentioned, this site's located on the northeast corner of North 12th Street and Princess Street. Contains approximately 0.02 acres. And as mentioned, it is currently occupied by a restaurant and a single residence. This map shows the general vicinity surrounding the request. And these are some of the existing conditions along Princess Street and North 12th. These are photos of the subject property looking from Princess Street and the intersection of North 12th and Princess. So the site's currently zoned O&I CD, Office and Institutional Conditional District. It is bordered by R5 residential zoning to the north and east. O&I zoning is located to the south, which is across the right-of-way and encompasses the portion encompasses the New Hanover High School parcel. There's UMX zoning located across the 12th Street and Princess Street right-of-ways to the west. Here's the applicant's proposed site plan. As mentioned, the applicant is proposing to rezone an existing O&I CD, Office and Institutional Conditional District, to UMX CD, Urban Mixed Use Conditional District. This is to maintain the existing uses, the existing restaurant, the cafe, which is Folks Cafe, to maintain that use and the attached single residence, and then add a new residence to the north, which is shown on the plan here. The site was once approved for a stationary retail store and copying service in 1985. Thus the reason for the O&I CD zoning district. So this is to bring the site into compliance with current zoning. Right now it's considered a legal non-conforming use. So this is to bring this up to compliance. The site is located within a high-density transition area of opportunity in a main street corridor and complete street on the Comprehensive Plan's Growth Strategies map. This proposed rezoning would allow for residential infill that's compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and consistent with the high-density transition area of opportunity designation. This proposed rezoning also allows for an additional housing unit near services and employment centers. Staff does believe that this proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the recommendations of the comprehensive plan and that it's reasonable in the public interest. We recommend conditional approval with the conditions in your case summary be applied. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, and the applicant's here as well.
Thank you. I'll start. Can you go back to the aerial that had the site plan on it? That was, the site plan's fine.
Okay.
Tell me what's happening to this alley, the 8-foot unnamed and unimproved alley.
There are no changes proposed to the alley.
Okay, and it's currently being used to access the Lewis and the Claybrook properties, and that will continue?
There are no changes proposed to the alley. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for staff right now? Great. Thank you, Mr. Mahoney.
Thank you.
And we welcome Ms. Wolf back up to the podium.
Thank you. Again, for the record, I'm Cindy Wolf, and I've been working with Ms. Pacini, who owns the Folks Cafe, through this process. The Folks Cafe, one of the things, we're near the high school. It is certainly in an active neighborhood there on 12th Street, near Chestnut, Princess, Market Street. Part of the comp plan was creating a place for everyone. Wilmingtonians want a diverse and inclusive community full of family-friendly, vibrant, and creative environments. Certainly a place like Folks Cafe is someplace for social interaction, comfortable, safe, and convenient pedestrian place. And I think that's why we want to continue what is there, make it conforming, as he said, just through some paperwork over the years. We've realized that it really was never intended as a cafe way back when it was actually zoned, the O&I that it is zoned. And growth should be accommodated in the city through mixed-use neighborhoods. Location-efficient housing is also promoted and encouraged. We have the O&I, it's an SUD, which is a long time ago, and I'm sorry to say I've been around all that long. But you can also see that all of the purple coloring off to the west and there at the upper corner of Chestnut and 12th Street is UMX. The urban mixed-use land classification is intended to ensure not only appropriate development pattern is maintained in the corporate limits, but to encourage a mix of uses to foster that sense of community that that is part of our comprehensive plan in creating a place for everyone. This is just a color rendering of what is there. The building is slightly different as far as the shape, but it is basically to add a one-story, because that's what the typical street housing is along 12th Street, but to add a home in addition to where we have the cafe and the existing dwelling that's beside it. There's a nice outdoor patio area that is in association with the restaurant. And the unnamed alley, in fact, it isn't improved in any way. There's an older picture that there was a little bit of gravel. The house to the north of it is also Miss Pacini's, and they are renovating it. So the alley can be used by the Lewis. Actually, Mr. Claybrook, I had been in conversation with, because we bandied around the possible closure of that alley, but that is not part of this petition. That was withdrawn or never even submitted. So the alley is the alley. Anyone that can use it, which would include ourselves, the Lewises, or Ms. Lewis and Mr. Claybrook, that is still available. Of course, the facade of Folks Cafe there at the immediate corner, and the attached house that's on Princess Street. This is the house at 110 12th that's being renovated, and it's got the same typical design that we're proposing for this new dwelling. The fenced-in area for the Folks Cafe is fenced in, so it's slightly screened, but it's still community. It's not just screened away so that it's a hidden space back there. It's all part of the temperament of the cafe. So with that, we believe this rezoning request is consistent, reasonable in the public interest, similar to the staff's recommendation for the reasons that the plan provides. Additional housing in a place that there are employment centers and near services, near transit with the bus lines along Market Street. It is in an area of opportunity for transition, and this is a slight transition. The UMX district provides versatility of uses, and with that, I will sort of mea culpa. When we propose this, certainly the cafe's there, that's what we intend to continue. But for the sake of, it was my thought, UMX provides some other types of uses, and we don't want to be corralled into if the restaurant were to cease to exist. So I've talked to staff. There are only 4 other potential uses that could work in that building, in this location, with this exact plan. And I'd like, if it's the board's choice to recommend approval of this, that you would please add to the conditions or whatever that limited uses, in addition to the restaurant that it is now, would include an art gallery, personal services, general retail, and offices. Now, those would all be limited to that building itself, and no change in the site plan. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I would just like you to repeat the list.
Okay, it is up on the screen too.
Oh, great,
But it
great,
would
thank
be
you.
an art gallery. That would be very typical of
Got it,
a
yeah.
unit like this. Personal services, but we would prohibit tattoo parlors from those personal services. General retail, it's limited to the square footage that it is, which is less than 900 square feet, and then an office.
Thanks. Commissioner Lennon?
Just, would you mind going back to the slide of the adjacent house on, oh, that was it. Go forward one, sorry. Yep.
Oh, okay.
So to the right of the existing house, is that the alleyway?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I just want to make sure I have my bearings correct. So that's a rendering of what you're seeing would be on the,
Yes.
I said south side again, but on the south side of that alley?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So basically, the same design that's on the north side, which is what she also owns.
Thanks.
Commissioner Woodruff?
Cindy, that alley, since you mentioned sometime way back you contemplated maybe looking for closure of it, you're satisfied that's a public alleyway?
Oh, yes.
Not just some easement over private property?
No, it is on the city streets maps as an unimproved alley.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Adams?
The dwelling unit that you propose, is that something that would be rental or ownership? Because I guess if it was ownership, would that require a parcelization?
It'd have to be a condominium or a parcel. No, this would stay under the ownership of the entire tract,
Okay.
so it would certainly be a rental. Or owner occupied, or,
Any more questions for the applicant at this time? All right. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ms. Wolf. We will open the public hearing now. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of agenda item number 3? Anyone here to speak in opposition of agenda item number 3? Welcome. We'll start the clock with 10 minutes and start with your name and address, please, so we can read that into the record.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Planning Commission. My name is Doris Henry. I reside at 1205 Princess Street, and I have been living there for 37 years. I'm a property owner, and my only concern with the plan was, and is, I just need clarity on some things. Presently, and I submitted the comment letter that she spoke of earlier. I submitted that. But my question or my concerns were that it's an unnamed alley. So when I look at the plans that's being shown, and I'm looking at the pictures, right now, that unnamed alley is blocked. The unnamed alley has been blocked since January of last year. So I did not want to cause any problems. I understand people they need to renovate. So I didn't question that part. So from that point of it being blocked with a truck, it has now gone to being blocked with a blue trailer. So I still cannot access the unnamed, unimproved alley. 1205 cannot, 1207 cannot. And I have not made a big issue out of it. It is something that was recorded in my deed when we bought the property back in 1986. So I'm not able to go around 12th Street and go to the alley and drive in. I can't. As I said, I understand progress. I'm all for progress, but not at the expense of me not being able to access my property. I try to get along. That's why I haven't said a word for the whole year. So it's okay that they're doing it right now. 1203, right next door to me, the coffee shop, the residence, and then the existing house that's on the other side of the unnamed alley, 1110 or whatever the address is. They're doing renovation. Renovations take time. I know that some things come up where you can't get it completed. I just wanted to know if there's going to be some kind of timeline involved, or is it going to always be blocked? But I don't know how to properly, I did not want to address or say anything to my neighbor because I didn't want any hard feelings. So that's basically it. I understand about the fact of wanting to improve the neighborhood. It's an asset. The coffee shop is great. I'm all for it. I just want the alley to be clear so that we can actually go in and come out. I just recently retired, so there's some projects that we want to do, but we can't do the projects because the alleyway is still blocked. So once they get through with whatever the projects they're doing, perhaps then I've kind of chose to do this. just kind of wait till they're done, but I just need a timeline, pretty much, to know when it would be actually an opened, unnamed alley. And that's it. Thank you so much. That's all I have.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak in opposition of Agenda Item 3?
How you doing? I'm Mr. Henry, 1205 Princess, and I also spoke to 1207. He's not opposition, but we don't want the alley closed. I built the fence around my property for privacy because, you know, they do their thing over there, and I got my own thing. I'd rather do it inside the gate. But in order to access the back gate, which I was planning on putting double gates back there, so I can take my equipment in and out when I go access my property, because you can't do it on 12th Street. So that's the only thing that I'm concerned about. I thank you for your time, and I read all the stuff that they want to do, which is fine. I just want to be able to back my truck into that alley, unload my materials, finish fixing my fence, because if a tree falls down and the alley is blocked, I can't get a company back there. Or if there's a fire, the fire truck can't get back there. So that's just a whole issue for me, because then when you have property damage, who do you call?
Thank you.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak on Agenda Item number 3? All right, I'll close the public hearing and invite the applicant back up.
Thank you, yes, and sort of apologies, but sort of explanation also. As they have been renovating that 110 12th Street, whoever brought that dumpster did set it right in the middle of the thing. But to that extent, Ms. Hudson, I'm sorry, I only knew, it says Lewis on the other, and Mr. Claybrook, they do both have fences. And so we apologize, it's one of those situations where the squeaky wheel gets the grease. No one has said anything, and again, mea culpa, that dumpster has been there for quite a long time. So certainly, we can get it moved, and that's something we'll do right away. It should never have been in the easement in the first place.
Thank you. It sounds like that would satisfy the folks that came out to the public hearing today. Commissioner Lennon?
Can we add that as a condition that it will?
Sure, but
Okay.
I mean, it needs to be moved now, not a
Well,
month from now or whenever.
That it would remain?
We might have had that conversation already. Okay. Yes, but I just, for long-term, just to make sure that's.
Yes, that there can be no blocking of the alley, that it is public.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Well, and as I said, I apologize. Had they said something, certainly something would have been done. And it is also a situation where it could be a complaint to the zoning administration. So it would have some type of review and violation would have been issued if they realized, I suppose. But it never should have been there in the first place.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant while she's up?
Madam Chair, I do.
Commissioner Cofer?
Ms. Wolf, with regards to a motion eliminating tattoo parlor from the personal services, anything else there that needs to be read into the record with regards to personal services?
No, the only one that I typically is when it's indoor recreation. We usually also prohibit shooting ranges. So there's some nuances to a couple of those things, personal services, indoor recreation, that there are a couple things that are included in those that I typically bring up, and personal services is one of them.
I thought I might make my first motion tonight, but you just made sure
No.
that's not happening.
No, it's piece of cake.
Too complicated.
Good luck, veterans.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Mr. Mahoney, do you, oh, yeah, the public hearing's closed. So I'm sorry, but you can nod or, that's why I was looking at you to see if okay, good. Thank you. Mr. Mahoney, the list of uses, what is your recommendation on that?
Staff would be agreeable to those uses listed.
Great. And so without them, the only use would be the cafe that's currently in the,
Correct.
thank you. And I think whoever makes the motion can just add that to condition 5 at the top of page 5 instead of creating another condition. Who's on their A game tonight and wants to give that a shot? What's the will of the commission?
Madam
Commissioner
Chair.
Kofer. Oh, you're pointing, okay. Commissioner Lennon.
Can I see your notes?
Of course.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval for agenda item number 3, rezoning of 1201 and 1203 Princess Street from ONICD to UMXCD. This request is consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan and the Northside Community Plan. The Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable in the public interest, as the proposal would allow for infill development consistent with the existing neighborhood and in close proximity to commercial services and uses. Further add to the motion the inclusion of the 5 conditions listed in the staff report with the amendment to condition 5 for the personal services use within UMX to only include an art gallery, personal services, parens, with the exception of a tattoo parlor, close parens, general retail, and offices. And that a 6th condition be added, that the public right-of-way alley to the rear be maintained open in conjunction with this request. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request.
Well done. Commissioner Lennon has moved to recommend approval for agenda item number 3 with the modification, with the amendments to the conditions. Do we have a second? Second. Commissioner Pollack with the second. We'll do a voice vote. All in favor of approval of this item, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And did anybody not vote? The motion passes 7-0, and we are going to take a 5-minute break to transition to the LDC and elections. The meeting is called back to order. And we'll resume with agenda item number 4, which is an LDC maintenance item to amend the Land Development Code for various amendments and cleanup items related to commercial district mixed-use application, depth of lots, and the process to adopt and modify the city's technical standards and specifications. And Ms. Smith is here to deliver a staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. The new Land Development Code was adopted by City Council on August 17th, 2021, with an effective date of December 1st, 2021. At the direction of Council, staff has continued to review and monitor the new document for errors and elements that do not work in implementation. As part of this ongoing effort, staff has identified 2 amendments that are needed to provide clarifications and correct issues discovered during implementation. The proposal before you this evening clarifies code provisions in 2 articles identified on your screen. Section 18-131F outlines the open space set aside for commercial districts mixed use. Current code, shown on your screen, is not clear how open space is calculated when the project is part of a cohesive development. The proposed amendment, represented by the underlined text on your screen, clarifies qualifying circumstances based on compliance with applicable use standards. Staff is asking for the Commission to consider a minor revision to the proposed language that was not included in your original packet. The recommended revision is shown on your screen in red. The Administrative Provisions Amendment seeks to reestablish the process to adopt and modify the city's technical standards and specifications. A process formerly existed in the previous Land Development Code, but was inadvertently left out of the new code. Again, the underlined text represents staff's recommendation. This slide maps the proposed process and also illustrates the former process. The only difference is the reference of the committee responsible for reviewing and approving the newer revised standard prior to City Council adoption. The comprehensive rewrite of the Land Development Code was expected to require amendments to correct errors and deficiencies, as well as long-term maintenance to adjust changes in development patterns and unforeseen land use issues. Staff continues to identify ways to improve upon the new Land Development Code. The proposed changes to the Land Development Code before you this evening are consistent with the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. The proposal is reasonable and in the public interest, and staff recommends approval of this request. That concludes staff presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. We also have Rob Gordon with engineering if there's questions specific to the technical standards and specifications manual.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Ms. Smith? Commissioner Adams?
So I have a question about the open space and the CDMU overlay. Is this being done, or is this being proposed to satisfy something that is out there specifically right now that is kind of an issue? Because in working with these kind of site plans, you know, typically that open space is a requirement that gets integrated in with the design in sort of a, you know, meaningful and representative way. But I interpret what you're proposing here as the revision that it can almost be a tagged on additive thing if you can sort of find a workaround to do it. Can you just talk a little bit more about the reasoning behind those changes for that?
Sure. So I want to start by saying that the projects that could potentially take advantage of this tool are projects that were in process during the code transition. That's why we're referencing projects approved prior to December 1st of 2021, which is the effective date of the new Land Development Code. This will not allow them to reduce the open space set aside. They are still responsible for providing 20%, but it will allow them to take advantage of the dedication of open space in another area of the development. For example, in a phased development, if the open space has already been set aside, but it was in Phase 1, but it's adequate to cover the requirement that will be for Phase 1 and Phase 2. They could potentially take advantage of this provision.
Commissioner Pollack?
Let me ask this question a little differently, because I think he's on a very good point. You talked about, I don't want to say this. How many projects are pent up that this change would then say, now they can move forward? Again, I'm kind of like Commissioner Adams. What's the driving force? I just want to be clear. In all transparency, I know we probably all kind of fumbled a little bit with with one of the other proposed change discussions about, when there was residential and commercial, et cetera, and holding the two aside. So what's driving this? Are there a bunch of projects that are pent up that need this to happen?
So I don't have an exact number of projects that could potentially take advantage of this, and that number could grow from what our expectation is today. I will say that this is been brought to our attention from the development community, so we are aware that there are projects that could potentially take advantage of this.
Okay. So again, it's an ask of the development community.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Lennon?
But in that, so I'm reading B, so the open space counts where the is located. But it's part of the project, not just located within 1,000 feet, right?
Right. The understanding is that it is a cohesive development, so it's a phase of a larger project that got caught in the crossroads of code pre-December 1, 2021 and post-code.
Okay.
I could add, it's also to address these phased projects that may have different zoning districts as part of them. So the CDMU may be part of one zoning district, whereas the open space for the entire development may be part of another zoning district. And we typically don't let you count things outside of a zoning district to meet requirements. But we recognize that in a phased cohesive development, that is something we should be taking into consideration.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I did have one other question on the process. So I'm reading, the city manager may make amendments to the standards and specifications herein, and those are the technical standards and specifications controlling construction practices and materials, and any policies applicable to such practices and materials. Can you give me 3 examples of what that might be?
Sure. Let's see, I've got a slide that outlines some of it. So on your screen are some examples of minor changes that have been identified by our engineering department that would go through this process. If you're asking what's currently covered in the technical standards and specification manuals, I also have the table of contents that kind of identifies, generally speaking, what would be covered under this document.
Okay, so without asking you to go through all those chapters,
Sure.
what I'm getting at is, I'm just thinking in a practical world, and I understand what it means when it says city manager, but so an amendment's made to the interpretation of a technical standard, according to this now, it's got to wait till it gets to council until it, in other words, that gets applied, the development world has to deal with it. It could be months before it gets to council to be worked on.
Not necessarily. The intent would be to allow a public comment period between drafting and bringing the proposed text to the Design Adjustment Committee. The Design Adjustment Committee would review it, make a recommendation, and then the item would appear on council as a resolution.
But it would be, the public comment period would be prior to the DAC?
You would have an ongoing dialogue, similar to what the expectation is with the land development codes before you this evening.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I may have missed it, but does it say that in here somewhere? Is that elsewhere within?
It's not codified language, and that's something that we've put on our radar as a potential process improvement amendment to bring forward with our next batch, is kind of outlining outlining, what the process is to solicit support or hear from our development community and citizens as to if this is the best practice and best approach to identify the issues or the concern that they have. For the purpose of tonight, we were trying to get it back into our code since it is a missing component.
Which I totally get. What you just said, kind of the first thought I had was cart and a horse. So am I being fair or am I missing something?
It's not codifying the practice, I guess. The practice is to draft the language, to put it out, to solicit input, refine, bring to the committee, and then have council adopt. Moving forward, we're trying to fine-tune that process, so that's why we didn't bring forward that amendment for you this evening, but it is on our radar that it needs to be updated and share the many ways that you can get involved and provide input into these ongoing efforts.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else? Any discussion? Thank you, Ms. Smith. Thank you. Any discussion on this item? Okay, what's the will of the commission on this one?
Chairman Lau, you have to have a public hearing on this.
Oh, gosh, that's right, sorry, thank you. It's almost 8. I'm useless at this point, so I'm not a night person. Let's do a public hearing. Is anyone here the public hearing is open. Anyone here to speak in favor of agenda item number 4? I don't believe we got anything on the website for this either, so. Okay, public hearing is closed. What is the will of the commission?
Madam Commissioner, I'd like to move to request approval of agenda item 4, the cleanup items and amendments to the Land Development Code. This request is reasonable and consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. The Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest because the proposed amendments will provide clarifications and correct issues discovered during the implementation of the Land Development Code and help reinforce the overall goals of the comprehensive plan. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams has moved to approve agenda item number 4. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Pollock. We'll take a voice vote. All in favor of approving agenda item number 4, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Did anybody not vote? Right. The item passes 7-0. Okay. Time for our other business, and we will do elections. We do this annually to the chair and vice chair roles are 1-year terms, and so every year we redo our elections. So we'll start with the office of chair, and Mr. Attorney, for nominations, do we need a second? Is that?
Yes, once there's a second on a nomination, it can be voted on. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just like any other motion. Okay, thank you. So we'll start with the office of chair, the role of chair, and open the floor for nominations for chair.
I would like to nominate Chairman Lyles to another term in her role.
Thank you for your confidence.
I'll second that.
And for the motion and for the second. and we'll take a voice vote. All in favor of Commissioner Lyle as the chair, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Anybody who didn't vote? Do I get to vote on that? Evans? Is it 6-0 or is it 7-0? Did I-
You can vote on it, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Don't make it 6-1.
Okay.
Going.
Great, motion passes 7-0. Did something happen to my mic? Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, and we will next do the office of Vice Chair. Do we have any nominations for
Madam Chair,
Vice
I
Chair?
would nominate Jack
Commissioner
Pollock
Woodruff?
for that position.
Commissioner Woodruff has nominated Commissioner Pollock for the office of Vice Chair. Do we have a second?
I got a second.
Okay, Commissioner Pollock was nominated for Vice Chair.
Woodruff. Ugly one.
Okay, and we had a second with Commissioner Goins. Sorry, I'm still talking into my microphone.
Check your
The
microphone.
mics are back on.
They're
Check,
back.
check.
Hello.
Amy, can you hear me? Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add was, I wanted to thank the staff for getting the package out. I know we, had a little bit of a firm discussion in December, towards the end, and I really appreciate the effort to get it out, and thank you very much. Much appreciated.
All right, items from staff.
Well, first, let me apologize for turning the mics off accidentally. It's 8 o'clock for me, too.
Home stretch.
2 items went to council last night. One was rezoning on 29th Street for the 3 single-family lots. City Council voted to approve that. And the other item was the townhome development on Victory Gardens. There was a healthy discussion on that one, and they requested that one to be continued, so the applicant could provide some additional elevations for those units that face Victory Gardens, and get some more information about some stormwater projects that may be occurring in the area, because there was questions from the neighboring properties about the existing stormwater conditions of not just this site, but the general vicinity. So that item will be on the council's 24th agenda.
All right, anything else from staff? Thank you. All right, if there's no other business, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Commissioner Pollock has moved to adjourn. Do we have a second? Commissioner Goins with the second. And all in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? All right, have a good evening, everyone.